Okay, this is part C, and we are speaking now, continuing our discussion of language assessment, evaluation, and assessment. And here we speak about assessing pragmatic skills slash social communication. So there are, again, available tools for social communication assessment, and we'll discuss resources again in the class. But you have to do for informal, it is even more important than formal if you can't find the formal. But a combination is good, but you have to put a lot of weight on the informal assessment. So first, you need to, I mean, I routinely evaluate these four skills that fall under cooperativeness, or what is known as the cooperative principle by Grice, J.H.P. Grice, 1976. This guy was a professor at Harvard, spent 40 years or more of his life focusing on speaking and what are the effective ways for someone to communicate. And if they do not observe these principles of communication, what is going to happen? That's going to cause a communication breakdown. And these areas have been there for a long time, but only recently have SLPs started to kind of understand and apply them. I use them consistently in my assessment, and there is an article that I have written and that is published with famous people in the field. The whole issue is from Asha. The whole issue is on evaluation of pragmatic skills. So I'm going to share it with you. So cooperativeness, I'm going to evaluate it through the language sample and also observation. And more importantly, I have my own tool. I'm going to also share it with you, that stimuli that I have developed to assess these areas. So the quantity, cooperativeness includes quantity. How is the language input in terms of quantity, quality, relevance, and manner. I want to, this is going to be again from language sample analysis, from observation, clinical observation, and the stimuli that I generate, or you could generate, or could use mine if you wish. And we'll look at the ability to initiate conversation, to maintain conversation, and to terminate the conversation. For example, when you make a call, etiquette rules show you make the call, you are the one to conclude the call, to end it. You don't wait for the other person, otherwise the other person will feel like offending you by terminating that, unless there's some problem here. Also initiating play. Okay, a child, okay, do you want to play with me? How about this or that? Or making and keeping friends. Non-verbal communication is a big piece, not just comprehending, the ability to use adequate conversational, non-verbal communication, and the ability to comprehend, and ability to express ideas, feelings, and personal experiences, ability to modify a message based on the listener and the setting and the time. That's called a register. Ability to repair communication breakdowns, classroom discourse skills, the ability to produce a narrative, to speak and connect the speech, and also to monitor what you are saying, turn taking, and that turn taking depends on the context. For example, in a classroom, the teacher is talking, the child is expected to be quiet unless there's something, So the rules of the context are going to determine who is going to take the turn. And in the schools, the teacher determines too. So we have language skills that need to be evaluated, and then we have cognitive skills. that we also need to evaluate. We need to have an idea about, because language components, all these 5 parameters of language, they are skills to enable you to function 2 roles as a communicator: to receive messages and to convey messages. So you must master the ability to receive, that is receptive language, and the ability to express, that means, or to give messages, that is expressive language. You must understand the language, both sides, to have the skills and demonstrate how to use them. But what if you have this? You know how to use words, how to understand, and all of this. However, you don't have what it takes to regulate how you use this to achieve a particular communication goal in a particular time, on a particular context. So that makes all the language skills you have ineffective. They are useless. I mean, someone who is insane is able to talk in perfect sentences, but that person might be talking to himself or herself. So the idea here is communication has a purpose. It is based on intention. That is what matters. And that intention is going to determine what I'm going to use, how I'm going to achieve my goal, with what. So neurocognitive skills, without them, there is no way for someone to be able to use the tools they have, even if they have perfect vocabulary, if they have everything superior language skills. I had a case like this. I'll discuss it in the classroom at some point. But this is an 8.5-year-old who had autism, and his skills were superior everywhere. But he could not even complete one assignment to write one sentence if you aren't standing behind or next to him throughout the day. And his language skills were superior in form and content, but pragmatics was way, way impaired, very impaired. So we need to have an idea about or evaluate directly theory of mind. Please watch this video. And you must have heard about false belief stories. There are whole books written that have stories about false belief stories to teach the skill to children who have difficulty. And there are adults who have decreased theory of mind or underdeveloped. This area is critical. It is known that many, if not most of the people with autism have impairments in this. Theory of mind is a continuum. It is not something you either have or not have. It is to various degrees, like come maybe slightly and you go to severe, slight or severely decreased skills, and then you go up better as you keep going, perfect skills. Self-regulation / executive functioning. That is the same. Executive functioning and self-regulation mean the same. So these skills enable us to regulate, to determine what to use, for what purpose, when, with whom, what language, what tone of voice. All of that is because of self-regulation. Your self-regulation skills are in the prefrontal cortices, right and left, and that is your command center that runs your life. And this is why if someone has a frontal brain damage, they have no inhibition, they just disregard the law, they don't know the difference between appropriate and inappropriate, you can imagine. So executive functioning or self-regulation include the ability to sustain and to switch attention. This is why I'm not speaking about the general attention ability. The executive functioning is a group of skills that are needed. So there's a special mechanism embedded with self-regulation just to serve the function, some kind of attention to serve the function of regulating oneself. And also, so to be able to sustain attention on the communication goal, what do I want? I want to convince him or of doing this or that. I want to convey an answer to prove that I know the, can answer the question. I know the information. I need to be able to self-monitor. You self-monitor your processing. You can look and say, I've been trying and explaining, and the person is not getting it. Maybe this or that. Maybe I should say it a different way. If you are reading or listening, and then 3 sentences you are having difficulty, should you continue to read even though you have gaps, you didn't understand the first 3 sentences, or should you stop, go back, replay, and make sure to understand the previous sentences before you proceed with the rest of the talk or the paragraph? Otherwise, you'll have a lot of gaps. So that is critical to comprehending and using language. And also, self-monitoring, you want to know what you said. You have been talking and you don't want to contradict yourself. Maybe 5 minutes ago you said this, and then now, if you are not paying attention and recalling, you are going to say something to make you look like maybe you are a liar or something. So, and also you need to monitor others, what they said, what they are doing, their body language, and you keep an eye on the topic that you and the person are talking about. You need to determine the context. Suppose you are standing in the hallway and talking, someone is coming the other way. Are you gonna just stand there obliviously or clear or step to the side? Maybe the person keeps looking. Maybe they are carrying a heavy load, and then you are not looking at the context, and they are just telling a story and talking, and the person is just exhausted and ashamed to say, please, I want to run to the bathroom. I want to run to a class. So these are critical skills that you cannot get from a test. You have to observe. Determine the best times for initiating and terminating and changing topics, for example. All of these are critical skills that are regulated by self-regulation. And monitoring your ability, your comprehension, how you appreciate, how you, if you have any gaps in your understanding, should you ask a question, should you wait? Inhibitory control. Inhibitory control includes suppressing motor behaviors that are not appropriate to the situation and the context, like maybe leaning back or putting your, for example, and you are in the courtroom maybe, or in a situation where you are not supposed to be that casual, or so also inhibiting verbal certain, like to have a verbal inhibition, to know what is inappropriate and to stop it, to block it from coming out. All of us are in situations where you feel like you want to just reply and say the worst thing to someone, and then you just smile and you keep it to yourself in your mind. But you say, oh, if I wish I could, or so, because that can cost us our job sometimes, or even more than that. So um, verbal inhibition is critical, and we need to know if the person has it. And we need to also very, very, especially in this area more than any other areas, to know if there's any history of traumatic brain injury, or if the person had suffered hits to the front of the brain. Verbal working memory is also a piece that is embedded, that is part of self-regulation, because to self-regulate, you need to, it's like you are a security. I was working in a store at some point when I first came to America. And I had the chance to go into the security room and see the guys sitting there with so many screens. It was a store like Target, it was called Bradley's. And you have like 7 or 8 screens, and they are sitting there staring at the screens, looking at this one, this one, this one, this one. And this is what self-monitoring, monitoring is like. But so you have your eye to do all of this, but to do self-monitoring and monitoring of the context and others, you have to have attention, number one. You have to have the screen to hold what is being said and to compare, analyze. That screen is working memory. Working memory is a short kind of span. It can go from a half a second to 3 seconds, maybe sometimes to even a minute or two. It's enough for you to take 7 digits, like a phone number, when the numbers were less than 10 or 15, and then to just repeat them, or to keep that until you find the note of something and just write it down. After that, the number is gone. It was actually phone numbers that were the cause of exploring this whole area in England when they started shifting from a five digit phone number to seven. People were falling apart because so they say, okay, let's chunk the first three and then get the other four. That helps people with area codes and stuff. So anyways, but verbal working memory on average is 2 seconds to recall information, and it is used to keep track of multiple things that are happening at once. And while you keep the stuff on the screen, you extract and break down and analyze and extract the most valuable summary of that, and then discard and dump what you did not use, and then take the juice of it or the concentrate, bring it in and store it so you can admit it to your long-term memory storage. So we need to have an idea about that. To test this area, I always, every language test I do it, I look at three pieces. I want to know what about if I test it in numbers, digits, say 9, 2, 5, 1, and there are tests to do that. Digits are different than, they don't have necessarily linguistic meaning as much. So I need this number to compare to word recall. I'm going to say words and they increase in number as we go, and I want you to say them. It doesn't have to be in the same sequence, but you are going to just repeat them to me as soon as I finish. And remember, so I'm going to give you one now. Okay. Elephant, door, hat. Great. Good job. Good job. Bottle, safe, car, lake, banana. Okay, how did you do? So you keep going, and every item you just do it twice, like five words as a group, unrelated, and do another five. And then if you do not get both of them, then so and again, this is a subtest. And then you compare how the person does on words, recalling words, and compared to digits. Digits are easy to remember, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or maybe not for this particular person. Some people benefit from that linguistic meaning. So sometimes the more the meaning that there is, the better the recall is. And in some, they can be overwhelmed by the meaning, even though for rote memory for numbers, because it's not doesn't have much meaning, they do better. And then when you come to linguistic, I mean the words, like someone who's learning English as a second language, they will struggle with words because some of them might not be familiar, or they might have just learned them the other day. So you can analyze this based on the performance and compare rote digit recall to words. The other part of this, to get a verbal working memory score, profile, is to look at sentences, and I go to the self for that. And then I can go and say on the word level, the person is doing, on the digit level, word level, and on the sentence level. The sentence performance should show better performance. And the reason is that the sentence creates a context, and there are many cues to make you remember something. Yeah, it is a story, and the story has many cues in it. So if someone is struggling on that level, then it could mean, difficulty. I mean, when you compare single words to sentences, so the person might have difficulty in all, but relatively, where do they compare? Now, we have the working memory scores now for this. How do these relate to comprehension? That is a big piece. So now I go and administer the understanding spoken paragraphs from the self. I administer the opus for comprehension of lengthy narratives, or a listening comprehension scale. And I'm gonna go and say, okay, the person is struggling here. Are all the work and memory scores decreased? Yeah, they are all decreased. Look at vocabulary. Maybe the vocabulary is fine. So now that means that the child has particular difficulties in comprehension attributed to decreased work and memory scores. Because you are reading a paragraph and you cannot just extract information. You can't store it in the work and memory to compare and to contrast and to analyze and move on, quickly with everyone else. So do you understand how you use tests and connect them with other tests or subtests so that you can explain why a skill is decreased? Another thing is that they had all of these subtests with the self. And clinicians, unfortunately, did not have the training. They didn't know what to do with this, how to interpret this, how to connect that with language. So another thing that was also taken from the self, it doesn't mean the skill is not relevant. It's just people can't, they haven't been trained. And I want you to understand how to do this so that you produce you have real insights and things that are so convincing when you say this is decreased because look at this, look at that. The other component is recalling numbers in a reversed order. It is a skill, easy, you can do this in just takes a few minutes. Okay, try 5, 9. You reverse it, say 9, 5. And then I'm gonna increase to 3, to 4, 5, and you could go on even to 7 digits. And then your job is to reverse back in order in the same sequence backwards. What does that performance mean in that case? So this one is the one that is for cognitive manipulation. That is the one that you have now the information here and you're sorting it out, imagining it and reversing the numbers backwards and walking backwards. It's about spatial processing. It's about mental manipulation, changing, altering things. That is the skill that you actually, it's the machine that makes you process language. Processing is a term overused. Processing means if you think about a field that has corn and the corn is on the stalk, I mean, this is in the field on the plant. And then think about the loaf of bread, the corn bread on the shelf at the store. Everything in between is processing. Okay? So it means sorting out, it means doing this and everything, and then packaging it and putting it on the store ready for you to use. So um, the way that as we look at these skills, we want to exactly show that this particular score is decreased and this is affecting the ability, to function in another area, in a higher level area, like comprehension of conversations, comprehension of a reading text, like story, or a story that someone reads to me. So if I can't cognitively manipulate and break down means analyze. Breaking down is to analyze something into smaller components and then synthesize, to rebuild. And once you are able to do that, you can create new ideas. You can have an insight and all of this. So that, like that little reversed numbers subtest, and that's part of the test of auditory processing. It tells you a lot. So it gives you also the ability to concentrate. It's mental concentration. This is what the subtest also tells you. So knowing these, you can build a nice neurocognitive profile, make it something extra in the report, and not for this course, but later I'm going to show you some examples, and then you just use this to interpret your language scores, the performance, and you translate that into real things and strategies you use in the class with your with the students you are working with. Okay, so there are many measures for pragmatics, and you need, before you start, I mean, to analyze, not to test, to analyze, you need to go back to semantic skills. Does the person have adequate vocabulary? Is the person able, for example, to resolve ambiguities, to understand ambiguous sentences, syntactic ambiguity, semantic ambiguity, to have the ability to understand figurative language, idiomatic expressions, and these indirect communications and nonverbal communication. So you need to make sure that all of this is fine, because someone who has pragmatics / social communication disorder, that disorder can't be made if the person has, I mean, I'm not saying can't, you can make it, but it can't be a true social communication disorder if the person has impaired morphology or syntax or semantics, because these are the bedrock for pragmatics to develop on. So then you are going to do formal assessments. For example, you can do the self-pragmatics profile. That's the standardized scale to give you some idea. The CASL2 pragmatic language test, it gives you scenarios. So and so did this, what do you think is going to happen? So and so did that, what would you do? So scenarios, but scenarios, they only show you to what extent someone has internalized social pragmatic rules. It is not a guarantee that when they are put in a certain situation, they will use the rules that they know. What if their cognitive skills, like self-regulation, are not helping them? So what I'm saying, it is critical that you do your own observation, that you do your own stimuli, that you evaluate this also informally with your own stimuli. And I'm going to share with you one. You can develop probably one that is even better than the one that I have developed and I used, but at least to give you something to begin with. Also, pragmatics language skills inventory, PLSI, receptive, expressive, and social communicative communication assessments. You can read this, but there are less social pragmatics assessment tools than other tools. And but again, whatever you use, you really need to focus a lot on doing an observation. I would observe the child in the class, observe the child with me while testing, observe the child out in the playground, see who he plays with. In the cafeteria is a very good place to observe. Is the child in the center of a group where they are having lunch? In the cases that I have seen, the child I was telling you about, 8.5-year-old, he was going to middle school. He would go to the cafeteria. No one is sitting with him. No one wants to sit with him. So again, that is significant, because when you help this child make a single friend, life is going to change for them. We need to look at spontaneous speech as part at the end of your expressive, receptive, expressive, formal scores and analysis and everything. Then you do spontaneous speech, and this is where you speak about the language sample that you got. There are ways to analyze a language sample. There are standardized criteria and reference, and even some computerized instruments to analyze from different perspectives. But you really don't need this. I mean, when I started my career, I would go, there's a book that we would buy and go through the analysis takes about 8 hours. I mean, you really don't need this, and you can do your own if with practice if you know how to. So when to elicit the sample, you need to, for example, find a particular context. You can begin with having a few pictures to the person can describe or talk about and see how they speak, like a couple of sentences about, say, a particular picture that shows some action or something going on. You can also use pictures that show a larger context, like a child at the dentist's office, and even the cookie theft picture or something. But these are like smaller tasks. The way that you you want to get connected spontaneous speech to reflect how the child on any given day speaks. You don't want to get a sanitized view of that. You want it to be spontaneous and natural and raw, like raw material. So tell the child to tell you something that is familiar, that they know totally, they don't have difficulty recollecting. And many of us, I mean, the kids, we expect that they know the story of the Three Little Pigs, for example, Goldilocks and the Three Bears, for example. But it happened that these stories, they are so familiar, they are so valuable, they can enable you to have information that is so important. And they wonder, I mean, the Three Little Pigs, this is like a kid's story. And the Goldilocks and the Three Bears. I'm going to ask you in the class, tell me your insight about why using this to get a language sample, especially look at the narrative connected speech, why it is so important to have something like that, especially these two. They can reveal a lot, not just about language, but about a lot of other things. So, and I asked the person, do you know the story of the Three Little Pigs? Oh, of course, oh yeah. Or Goldilocks, and if not, have you watched a movie recently that you really enjoyed? It would be good if you haven't even watched the movie yourself, because that means, yeah, if you find gaps where you say, wait a minute, what? Wait, did this happen before? The more questions you ask as a listener, the less the skills or the less competent the person is who is telling you. The one who's telling you is going to organize and sequence, have a beginning, have details, have an ending, not to tell you the story and come at the end and say, the end. No, that is a sign of immaturity. It may be appropriate at 3, 4 years old or 5, but it's not going to be appropriate for older kids. They should make the story end by itself. It should make itself end spontaneously without saying the end. Okay, so we'll ask you questions about this and explore how these are critical. I mean, the way that you get from the sample in very important information. Okay, so now we can analyze the sample formally, informally. Frankly, informally is going to be as good as the other way, especially for this age. So you want to look at the speech rate, how fast. Look at fluency. That is part of the general observation of speech fluency. That could mean decreased vocabulary, could mean difficulty with attention, whatever. But look for these: narrative organization and story grammar. Story grammar, there was a program that was called Story Grammar Marker, developed by a couple of people in Massachusetts. It hasn't been selling much, but it was really good. It has this ball of fluffy, fuzzy fur, and then it has a string, it has beads and a star and stuff. So anyways, the story grammar means the components of a story, beginning with an initiate in a person, an initiating event, and then something that we call it the kick off the action, like something that triggers something important. And then you start details, and then after that you look for solutions. Try this, try that, is the story. So do they have that? That is critical for narrative organization, narrative sequencing. In the sample analysis, we look at the vocabulary. Is the child using complex vocabulary, higher functioning words, or just high frequency words that they are familiar, they are using every day, and they don't have a rich vocabulary? Do they repeat a lot of words that they say? Do they use gap fillers? Is there a decreased vocabulary score when we analyze? So that's going to enable you to see and to compare their how they express themselves to the vocabulary skills they should have. Is there vocabulary diversity? Do they use a variety of words that mean maybe the same thing? Little, tiny, and different synonyms. And the usage, do they use the words they know accurately to convey the meaning accurately in the way that the word expresses itself? Look for word retrieval problems, because that could mean either decreased vocabulary, attention problems, working memory problems, or long-term problems, long-term memory. And also look for, now you take the language sample and analyze it carefully using these 4 components of the cooperative principle. Number 1, I'm gonna show you again the tool I have been using that I developed. Quantity means is the information the person provides more or less than what the listener wants. If I ask you a question, are you 30 years old? Or even if I ask you, are you 60 years old? Okay. Sometimes I get questions like this. Are you 18 years old or older? Of course. So simply the answer is yes or no. This kind of question as a key, as a tool is in my hand as a listener, as a communication partner, to get from you the information that fits what the needs I'm looking for. Are you 24 years old? Either yes or no. Don't tell me stories. Okay, that is how it is. And this is why in the courtroom, yes or no. Okay, so that is quantity. What if I ask you a question, why did you do this? And you just say because, and then you don't say anything. Or give me like a couple of details. No, in this case, you need to give more details to match the kind of question that your listener or your communication partner is asking. So the question words that we use and the kind of question are keys in your hand as a communication partner to elicit a particular kind of response with a particular expected number of words or output. If I say to you, how? Now I give you an open-ended question. You can go as long as you want to, and why as long. So in that, you can grossly estimate if you give them 10 questions, is, are, did, and they give you like 7 of them telling you stories, that's not effective. That's a problem. This child, I was telling you again, this case, 8.5. I said, "Do you have a sister?" And he rolled his eyes. He said, "You don't even know. She's not a sister. She is a," and he just started, "She drives me crazy." And he can continue, but he didn't answer the question. So um, that is quantity. Easy, straightforward, with a little, like 10 or 20 questions. Very quickly, you can, in 2 minutes, you can get an estimate of how the person is doing. Unless they keep you talking. Quality, it means basically without decoration. Is the person telling you the truth? And is what they are saying accurate? It isn't like you are digging into their intention. There are people who have psychosis and might tell you something that's totally infactual, and they think it is true. But the idea is the quality of what they say. Is it true? It may, if you say, "How is the weather? Is it raining outside?" They say, "No, it is sunny." And I go, "Right now, look out the window, and it is not sunny." Okay, so quality, it can be, I mean, you can determine based accurate or inaccurate, true or untrue, or true or false. What is it? If in between, I don't know, then I should say as I don't know. What if I am kind of, don't take my, so this is why we use these modifiers. It may be raining. It means like, don't take my word for it. It could be this, could be, but if I say something or answer a question as a matter of fact, it should be a matter of fact. So you look for that as well. I mean, I had one case where the child was confabulate. She told me a long story, 13-year-old. And then the police, she's friends with the police, and she goes there and they have a kennel where they keep stray dogs, and she goes there to feed them and to take care of them. And she drives 13 years old with no license, takes her mom's car because the police officers know her and they are her friends. And when I went and was speaking at the meeting and saying this, the mother was appalled. She said, "Oh my God." She said she has a history of lying and manipulating and this and that. That was relevant, and I identified it with this through this using this criteria. Um, Relevance, it means, and also another example of quality. I was testing a child. She was 9 years old. And then she was telling me a story. And she said, "Yeah, I was walking from this building to that building. And then as I was walking, uh, the two birds built a nest on my head and they hatched and they laid eggs and hatched and this and this and that." I said, "Oh, nice story, fairy tale." But then, as we were speaking, somehow she told me the story about the mermaid, Little Mermaid. And then when she knew that there are no mermaids down living under the sea, and she started crying. She was 9 years old. She said, "No, don't tell me that the mermaid doesn't exist. It is real." And she was crying. So there's a term in psychology for it, like in other words, mixing reality with fiction, being confused about it. So relevance, it means that the speaker, these are all having to do with the speaker, that the speaker's output is all focused on the topic that is being exchanged and being discussed, among the speakers or the two speakers or more. So if I am just talking and they switch or speak about something that's not related to the topic, then that is irrelevant. So whatever the speaker says needs to be related, relevant to the topic. That is three. You can determine it based on observation. You don't that throughout the testing you can determine that. Like the person talks and get distracted and then mixes topics and switches and gets confused. Manner is the nature of the output. Is the person's verbal output well organized? like they tell you something that has, you begin with the beginning and go to the next step and the step after, and organize your output sequentially based on time, based on logic, based on whatever. And then is your output clear? Is everything explained? And is your output free of ambiguity? Like when you say, Samantha and Anna went, uh, took the train to work. Then she had a headache after she went home. Okay, that is ambiguity, pronoun ambiguity. Which one is she? You mentioned two females. Which one are you referring to? So that leads to ambiguity, leads to confusion. So again, you determine this by the number of questions that come to your mind as the person is talking and explaining and discussing, say, telling you the story of the Three Little Pigs or another story. How is their verbal output organized? Comprehension is a fuzzy area. It's a big area, important area. It relates to everything in life. And many problems can cause comprehension deficits. It can be decreased vocabulary. It can be decreased semantics, syntax, semantic skills, you name it. It can be a language issue. It can be decreased background knowledge. It can be unfamiliarity with, a situation. So, or it can be attention problem. An attention problem can cause it. It can be central auditory processing disorder can cause it. In other words, you do your testing and analyze, and you look at the history. If there's attention, if there's working memory impairment, you determine if the person has comprehension skills caused by language factors or by neurocognitive factors or by socioeconomic factors. Maybe the person doesn't have a good background, the person doesn't have enough this and that experiences in life. So you need to do differential diagnosis to determine if there's a comprehension impairment. Is it based solely, primarily on lack of language skills that facilitate comprehension, or are there other issues that may be causing that? And this is why, again, when I do comprehension testing, I look at a subtest or a test that only like the self. It doesn't give you repetition, no images. I get one, what if we give the person images and repetition, are they gonna do better? Then that is an easy accommodation. And then we can recommend it, and we can also, as we continue to work on other areas. Standardized testing has advantages and has some disadvantages. Some of the advantages are it is objective. It gives you the tasks and everything compares to the norms. You can have something in hand and say the person is on at the 60th percentile or this kind of ST9, whatever. So you can compare in an objective way. And many of them are highly respected and reliable. However, when you look at the way they are administered, they require a quiet setting. They require a sanitized environment, like ideal listening environments, no noise, no disruptions. The classroom is not like that. Life at home is not like that. The society outside is not like that. And we are testing how the person functions in life so we can take the performance and the scores and interpret how, relate that to these contexts. So that is one of the things. The other thing is bias. Bias is not negative here. It means whatever the items that you have, if you administer to all 6 years old or 6-year-olds, all of them should have the same experiences in life. All of them should be familiar with the terminology, with the vocabulary, everything. What if someone who didn't grow up as a native speaker and then you give them that test? It's not valid because that person is not represented in the test. What if, for example, you show a picture of an animal here, a skunk. It is familiar with everyone. But if you go to someone coming from a different country that doesn't have a skunk, they don't even know what that is. And then you mark it, and then other similar areas like this, they are not familiar with, they are performing below average. So standard test is not appropriate for everyone. And they have to be administered strictly under the same conditions everywhere. And if you make any modification, anything, even in, as you are saying an item and you repeat it when it's not supposed to be repeated, the scores are not valid. So these are things that, about. The other thing is that they were misused. In the past, they would use them to place people in institutions and they sterilize and this. Based on IQ testing that didn't really, it was biased towards the wealthy, towards the people who are able to afford this and that, and the ones who are socially, economically disadvantaged were not given a chance to have someone read to them and tell them about this and that, and then you tested them with an IQ, they would show mental retardation, and then just the next thing is you go and throw them in an institution. And so anyways, they have a lot of disadvantages. However, and in some states, I mean, I'm not saying they are bad. We should use them, but we have to use our judgment and to use our informal tasks as well, activities. When you look at a standardized test, we focus on validity and reliability. Usually, I mean, you don't need as an individual clinician to worry too much about these because, I mean, the technicalities, because the company that wants to publish a good test, it has to test and make sure it's valid and reliable. And they do a lot of statistics. Most of the manual you have is about the technical terminology and processes, procedures to determine that this test is valid, this test is reliable. So what does that mean? We need just to know this test is valid. So it is valid, it means it is, say a test is developed to test children's semantic skills between 6 years of age and say 9 years of age. For example, when I test a child, does this test really address all the components of semantic skills at this particular age range, in this particular age range? If it does, okay, we say good for this component, because there are many pieces of validity, many kinds, many forms. If when I give the test, does it show bias? For example, is it biased towards maybe kids more towards, like, say, girls or boys? Bias comes if we have a sample, we say test 100 girls and test 50 boys. That definitely is going to show that there's more data relating to girls than boys. So you need to have equal. When you test, does the test evaluate functioning in the area that it says it is developed to test? It's for semantics. Does it actually focus 100% on semantics and identify all the areas within semantics? If so, it is valid. So validity, the number that you are looking for, it can be either valid means 1 or invalid means 0. And you are not going to find the test that is 0 and that is called the self. So the best numbers you look for validity and reliability is 0.80 or 0.90 and above. But usually no test proclaims to be like 1.0 valid. It's just statistically not possible. So 0.80 means the test has a strong validity. 0.90 means considered to be excellent validity or excellent reliability. Or so reliability means if I administer the say the first part of the test, are the results consistent with the second part? If I administer the the items that are supposed to be starting for say 3 years or 3.5, are they really kind of, am I gonna get the same results if I administer to another child? Similar, I mean, I'm sorry, if I administer, say, the similar areas in the second half of the test, what if I test that child using this particular test, and then another person comes, takes the same test, follows the same procedures, and tests the same child? Will they get the same results, or just within a margin, error margin? Will they get a similar results? Yes. Then that is reliable. It means every time you give the test, it is going to give you similar results. So that is all I want you to know about this. Nothing big, but look for the number when you flip through the test, that the number should have 0.80 or 90, unless you don't absolutely find no testing in this area available. Then you might, just look at and report it in the testing. Say this test, it has a lower validity or reliability. However, we had to use it because of lack of other testing. However, I haven't experienced that. There are so many tests out there, and they're always consistently above 8.8. Criteria and reference tests are tests. They do not eliminate the need for standardized tests. Criteria and reference means that you have a set of criteria that you want the child to accomplish or to see, and especially to perform. And then you have a baseline, and you work and see how close the person closely they can achieve their target. It is after you administer standardized testing, you identify the areas of deficit, like say deficits in morphology, in semantics, and syntax, whatever. So you get one of these or design your own, stimuli, and administer, not with the goal to compare performance to other kids, not with the goal to say standard norms or anything. You just want to know how the child approaches language, how do they use what they know, and how they use language skills functionally. And you want to explore the intervention targets. So, the deficits have been identified in semantics, say lexical semantics. Okay, this one test, the criteria reference could focus just on semantics, pages after pages, exercise after exercise, and then you administer to see how the person does. The advantage, you can give explanations. You can say why this is wrong, why this. You use it as an instruction also, and identify strategies. How will the person learns, and to what extent can they retain their knowledge, and so on. So you also use this to identify sub areas that need to be addressed in the intervention by making goals on these. Like if you're testing, say, semantics, and they say, okay, is the deficit in lexical or structural? And then the testing is not going to tell you this or that. You're just going to say semantics. Then you go to one of these criteria reference, and you look at sub areas in semantics, and you might break these, take these and make them as goals. And then you also see how the level of the child at that level, and you can get a baseline. Say vocabulary knowledge, the child was able to identify 4 out of 10 vocabulary words that are randomly selected for his age. So that is your baseline. And then you go to treatment and say, for accuracy, I want the child to do the same thing, but I want to see 70% accuracy instead of 40. And as you keep working, you want to see progress moving towards 70. And then determine the progress and whether the intervention goals have been met. So frankly, I used this only once in my long career as an SLP. So you don't have to use like commercially available criterion reference tests. Your evaluation and a thorough analysis will enable you to identify your intervention targets and to establish a baseline and so on. So these are examples of criterion reference tests. And again, you can develop your own. Some of them you might find for free, and you can explore some of them online. Some of them are available, just you can download as a PDF, or you can use some to develop your own tasks. So now we have taken the case history, built the background, we have administered our testing in every area, we analyzed our language sample, everything is done. What do we do? So we need to complete kind of the scoring, and we need to analyze the scores. What do they mean? What are the scores like? How are the total scores consistent with the subtest scores? Remember that total scores, index scores, sometimes they call them, or total scores, language scores, receptive, expressive, language, total scores, they don't guarantee that the person doesn't have gaps. So you need to look at individual subtest scores and connect them and see what score can help you understand the performance on an area that is related, like a working memory score that is below average, like say digits or word recall or sentence recall. These scores, how do they connect with comprehension, with the ability to follow directions? So you can use one score to interpret performance in another score. So also look for any gaps, examine subtest scores, identify possible etiological factors if you can. In some cases, we have no idea, we do not know. But in some cases, when you look at test scores, you might find that, say, decreased attention can be a cause for some of the problems you observe. Maybe the background history will show you that this child, even no one reads to him or her. Maybe they come from an environment that just somehow doesn't have, enrichment, where the child is deprived of opportunities. So, and then we try to analyze and explain the impact on functional performance. We need to understand, keep in mind at the end, what are the questions that were raised at the beginning? Am I going to be able to go down, to the assessment meeting and say, this is the answer, this is the answer? So whatever you can identify the cause, it is good, but there are some that you have no proof for. We need to also look at the consistencies between scores, between receptive and expressive, any gaps between spontaneous speech and standardized performance. We look for gaps. We need to integrate and put all these pieces together and then understand them with reference to each other. For example, receptive language skills are decreased. This is why expressive are going to be decreased, for example. So look at scores, interpret them, with reference to each other. And then you need to always, after you report a score, how do you expect this is going to impact performance in life? And that is going to translate into strategies that you can use as recommendations. So think about all of this while you are writing your report and doing your analysis. Keep that sheet. Oh, I'm going to make a recommendation here. Write it down as you are reviewing. Oh, I'm going to make a strategy, develop a strategy, put it down. So you look at all this, just literally, this is like a puzzle that you are looking for, and the pieces are scattered all over. So you have to lay everything and then compare and then come together and make the diagnosis. When explaining things, don't be over certain. You can say, it seems, it appears that, for example. A neuropsychologist who diagnosed someone as a child, and that someone is an adult today, still has the same problems um, with ADHD. So the report said this person presents with features that are consistent with, okay, consistent with the diagnosis of ADHD. Didn't say the person has ADHD. You don't have, like, it's not like a blood test. So yes, the diagnosis is valid, everything. So say that person meets the criteria for, or the deficits are consistent with the diagnosis of language disorder. And then you complete the report and you'll be ready to share with your team, the assessment team, the results, but you need to send the report ahead of time so the school can send it to the parents and to share it with the teachers. Everyone who has questions, they will prepare them for that meeting. When you go to the meeting, you give a summary and then you are there to answer questions. As a grad student, the SLP is going to be there. Typically, and then you might be able to present your results and everything. And if there's a big question, they will that you can't answer, the SLP there is going to answer. So again, we looked at the primary goal of the assessment, which is to identify, to determine if there is a problem, if the person meets the criteria for a diagnosis of language disorder. If so, then we have other secondary goals. What are these deficits? 1, 2, 3, make them very clear. And also, what baseline, what is the basic level of these skills that the person has? Because we are looking now for recommendations for treatment, and we need to go where, to know where we start, and to go back to the baseline always and say, this is where he was, and this is where he is now with my help that I have been given him. And also, treatment targets, the areas of deficit that you identify, each one is going to be a treatment goal. And the assessment involves planning, testing, and extensive work after the testing. You write your report gradually as you go with the background piece, and after that, as you get the results, put them on a table. When you score, just have the blank table like the ones I have, for example. You can plug in your scores, you can use that format, and you can fill and empty it based on what testing that you give and modify. It is helpful to keep these tables and the description of the tests or the subtests below so that you don't have to do this every time. There are many standardized tests out there, many procedures to follow, but you need to do your best to understand what the concerns are, and your knowledge of the available testing materials and procedures will help you determine a short list of what to administer and exactly to assess, to evaluate what. And then the diagnosis must be based on all the pieces together and your ability to see sub areas, even if they don't show up in the overall language scores. You need to identify and you can justify impairments that are embedded within, because you are the one to make the recommendation. I haven't had many people tell me like principles or otherwise tell me you shouldn't do this, you should not recommend that. I am the one ethically responsible. And if I don't carry out my ethical duties, I'm going to lose my license. So, I mean, you are the ultimate one to carry that responsibility. Uh, it is also critical to analyze performance on informal testing compared to formal and make your eval diagnosis based on both. The formal might show you the person has the skills, but the informal is going to show, are they really using the skills? It's important to look for gaps and explain seemingly contradictory scores. If you understand your testing well, you might not find contradictions. You'll find decreases here and there, but they explain each other. And also, I'm going to give you a bank of resources that you can use. Keep these for you in the long term. Your kit that you are going to use. I have the Shipley chapter 2025 from the 2025 book. It has a lot of language. Tables, developmental, and forms. Clinical forms you can just copy and use right now in your clinic to test various areas to screen. So these are very, very valuable things to have. And if you have the textbook, Paul also provides a lot of resources, but the extensive ones are in Shipley, and they will suffice. Shipley also provides an exhaustive list of all language testing materials and screening materials right there in one place, and they have that chapter online.